a historical fiction novel to add to your reading list that's set at the height of the civil rights movement in the 1960s is In the Face of the Sun by Denny S. Bryce. In the Face of the Sun is a dual timeline novel. It takes readers on an audacious road trip with a pregnant young woman and her brash aunt from Chicago to Los Angeles to confront a decades-old mystery from 1920s Black Hollywood. In the Face of the Sun by Denny S. Bryce is being published by Kensington Books, and it's a historical novel you really don't want to miss. Welcome to The Reader's Couch, a podcast that brings you lively conversations with some of your favourite authors and bookish personalities. Over here, the couch is always booked, but I've moved some books to the side table and fluffed some cushions so I can welcome a guest or two to come lounge with us. Today on the couch, we have Niko Wolf, and she's here to talk to me about her debut thriller, Birthday Girl. A literary thriller set in 1990s New York, where an impoverished writer takes his wife out for her birthday. She gets in a stranger's car and is never seen again. She's presumed dead, but then 20 years later, he's seeing her everywhere. And soon, it becomes clear that the people closest to him are hiding something. Stay tuned. A riveting thriller about a fugitive in search of a quick payday in Mexico City who finds himself in the crosshairs of a dangerous international scheme is Take No Names by Daniel Nia. In the novel, we meet Victor Lee, who's living under an alias in Seattle. He accepts a job offer from Mark Knox, who says he's running a logistics company, but is really breaking into storage facilities to steal valuable items. During one such burglary, Lee finds a puzzle box out of which drops a red stone that looks like an uncut ruby. Lee soon figures it's the world's rarest gem, which Chinese extraction firms have been illegally mining in Myanmar. And that makes unloading the jewel complicated, and Lee and Knox have become enmeshed in a Chinese scheme to launder money and evade US sanctions. Take No Names by Daniel Nia is being published by Eco Books, and it's a twisty, action-packed thriller with a compelling plot that will keep you guessing. So add this book to your TBR. It's a summer thriller you really don't want to miss. Hi readers, welcome again to The Reader's Couch. I'm your host, Victoria Wood, and here on the couch with me is Niko Wolf, and she's here to talk to me about her debut thriller, Birthday Girl. Please welcome to the couch, Niko Wolf. Hey Niko.
Hi Victoria, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, super excited to have you here. So let's get into Birthday Girl. I know your book's coming out this week here in the US. Readers will be able to get their hands on a copy soon. On a scale of 1 to 10, how are you feeling?
Ooh, can I say 12?
Absolutely. You probably could even go to 100 maybe.
I could go to 101, in fact.
Oh gosh, I'm sure it's, a very, very, very exciting time, maybe a bit nerve-wracking too, but I want readers to hear from you, straight from you, Niko. Tell us about your novel Birthday Girl and what can readers expect going in?
So Birthday Girl is set at first in 1990s New York, and we meet really a couple of would-be starving artists, Jonathan and his wife Maddie. And one weekend, Jonathan takes Maddie out to the beach to celebrate her birthday. And within hours, he finds himself at the local police precinct trying to explain how on earth he let his wife get into a stranger's car and watch it drive her away. She's never seen again. Maddie is never seen again. We meet Jonathan about 20 years later, and he has channeled his grief into a best-selling crime series, as you do. And one day he's walking through his local bookshop and he happens to catch a glimpse of Maddie, his dead wife walking through the bookstore and in fact just approaching the exit. So he chases after her and of course comes out onto the street, can't find her, runs around. And this starts off a whole odyssey for Jonathan of trying to figure out, is she alive? Is she back? Or is he going mad? And as the book progresses, we watch him sort of try and confide in various of his friends and his family, really to no avail because they don't really believe him. And after a while, he gets this creeping feeling that someone is lying to him. So much of the book is really trying to figure out for the reader as well as Jonathan what happened to Maddie, and is she alive or is she dead?
Or is Jonathan going mad? Because quite frankly, reading through the book, I know that was a big question amongst his friends and family that he confided in. But I want us to go back to the 1990s in New York when Jonathan was an impoverished writer. He wasn't doing too well. Because when he sees Maddie years later, he sees her in a bookstore. He's now become a really successful writer. So I want you to, share with all listeners, tell us about Jonathan, who he is as a character and as an individual before Maddie went missing.
Yeah, he was quite young, in sort of his early 20s, as was Maddie. They lived on the Lower East Side in New York in a not very nice apartment. And he was bartending. And he was really like a lot of young people who come to New York, and he had big plans to be an artist, or in his case, be a writer. He is very much in love with Maddie, who in some ways he feels that he can never measure up to. And at that point in his life, he was very far from being successful.
Right, absolutely. And now, he's a successful crime writer doing really well for himself. But Maddie's at the center of this mystery. What really happened to her back in the 90s when he reports her missing to police and so on. He kind of comes to terms that, she died. But then he glimpses her years later and now he's questioning everything. But tell us about Maddie, because I felt like we really got to know Jonathan right off the bat, but Maddie was a bit elusive. So tell us about Maddie when she was with Jonathan, before she went missing, just so readers can have an idea of who she is as a character.
Yeah, I sort of feel the way that Maddie is very different from the way that Jonathan sees her, perhaps. And because the book is really from Jonathan's point of view, we most of the time see her from his perspective, right? And she is, in a way, a little bit of an enigma for us, and also for him, which I think is half the attraction, right? She herself is a creative person. She writes. So they're both writers. She's also an actress. So Maddie is like Jonathan. She's a creative person. She's very, very independent. And I think this sets up a tension we see in the relationship early on, which is she'll go off on these sort of midnight walks around the city, and Jonathan sits at home and worries about her. And indeed, later in their relationship, of course, she does disappear and she doesn't come back. And it's sort of all his fears realized. But yeah, she's very independent. She has definite opinions about things. She seems to Jonathan much more mature than he is. And I think that's part of the tension between them, is that they really come from very different backgrounds.
Right, absolutely. So there's Jonathan, there's Maddie. Maddie goes missing and he glimpses her, like we've mentioned, in the bookstore many years later. Now, seeing her spirals, Jonathan, it's almost like he descended into a maddened state, for lack of a better word. But he's also kind of moved on with his life. His life has progressed. So, yes, he's now successful as a writer, but he's also about to remarry. So, Maddie popping up now, the timing, of course, is just, for me as a reader, it was just wow. It kind of aids in Jonathan kind of losing it a bit. So, but also it seems, and I'm not going to say anything because, you know, we're keeping it in spoiler-free territory here, but his friends have something they're hiding as well. So there's that layer to the story as well. Is there anything else you want to add to the mix?
Yeah, I think actually it's interesting because you hit the nail on the head in terms of the timing. And, you know, whether or not Maddie is alive or dead, we have to wait until the end of the book to find out, right? As does Jonathan, of course. But I think the question of why now is a very important one. And as you've pointed out, he is about to remarry. In fact, he's marrying Maddie's best friend, Laura. And he has become very successful. And with that success and with that wealth that he has acquired, he has become a little bit complacent. And so he really has everything. He's living the life. He's about to get married. But of course, we sense that underneath maybe he has some doubts about getting married for a second time. Yes, it does seem a little bit interesting and a little bit of a coincidence that he should see his dead wife at that very time. And I think to your point about, you know, people hiding something from him, yes, Jonathan does kind of lose it at this point, right? Because, you know, losing Maddie all those years ago was obviously a big deal. He channeled his grief into his writing. He's living the best life that he can. But seeing her again kind of brings it all back. And it really sort of puts a spanner in the works with his life with Laura, who he's about to marry, his relationship with everyone else in his life. And it really brings out all the tensions in those relationships and the differences. He doesn't at first come out with the information to everybody. He sort of keeps it to himself for a while. He's sort of trying to work out what the hell's going on. But he does tell his best friend, and I think that to him feels like a little bit of a betrayal when his best friend really sort of doubts what Jonathan has seen. And then Jonathan himself starts to doubt what he's seen. He gets quite paranoid, and it sort of throws him back into that time again with Maddie and him trying to work out what's going on. And again, trying to figure out really who it was who really took his wife.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, I had no idea where the book would end up as we kind of got close to that final twist. It had me really rethinking things. And outside of it just being a mystery, it was a thorough exploration of success for Jonathan and just success in general, whilst also in the face of trauma, because what he experienced with Maddie first go around was traumatic. Seeing her again, wondering if he's going mad and not having the support of his friends and family, they think he's mad. And like you said, you know, him experiencing that paranoia, yeah, it can be a bit traumatic. So I found it compelling, twisty. It had me thinking, and I like that in a mystery. So, yeah, I was very pleased indeed.
Yes, I think that it's very much a story of success in the face of trauma for Jonathan. And he's sort of done all the right things, right? In many ways, he's moved on. But Maddie has clearly retained that little crucial place in his heart. And I think that he's built this narrative for himself. And when he thinks that he sees her again, it sort of all comes tumbling down. And I think that for me, when I was writing it, there was a point where I thought, oh, it would be really fun if people read this twice. So you read it as someone who doesn't know, obviously as the reader, you don't know what's going to happen. And I'm hoping people want to know what really happens and get to the end. And then when you do get to the end, I think, you know, to your point, it's sort of, you maybe would want to go back and read it with that new knowledge of what really happened.
Exactly. I agree with that 100%. And as an advocate for rereading books, I think this one would be a perfect candidate. This mystery thriller for me was, you know, like I said earlier, it was very thought-provoking. So I know it's something I would love to revisit. And for my readers out there who reread books, this one's definitely worth the reread, I'd say, because I think we'd find more things that we might have skipped the first time round.
Yes, that's all we can say about that, right? But yeah, I hope that the book has layers, and everyone in the book has layers as well. And, when Jonathan suspects that at least one person in his life is lying to him, he is not wrong. He is not wrong. That's all I will say.
That's all we'll say. And you guys, this is just reason for you to pick up Birthday Girl. It dives deep. It's more than just, a twisty thriller and mystery, which we love. But there are things there that will have you thinking, because it had me thinking through. And on that note, Niko, I'd love for you to share with listeners your inspiration for this novel. What was the spark that made you decide, I'm going to put pen to paper, I'm going to write this story, this mystery, this thriller with so much, in my opinion, depth to it as well?
I think some of it was sheer fright that I just published my first novel and that I needed to write a second one as soon as possible. So that was part of it. I thought I need to put pen to paper and sort of start before I think about it too much. But actually, there was a crucial event several years ago. I was out on Long Island with a friend of mine, and it's actually pretty much the exact place where Birthday Girl starts. So if you remember, Jonathan takes Maddie out to the beach for her birthday. And I was, a few years ago, on that very beach. And I was with a friend of mine, and we spied an E-Type Jag, which is a very, very nice sports car that was created in, I think, the 50s. Very beautiful car. It was parked by the side of the road, and it's my favorite car. I think that's pretty much the only thing that I have in common with Maddie, is that we both like that car. And my friend said to me, I wonder where the driver is. And we actually parked ourselves at a short distance from the car and waited like stalkers. We waited for the driver to come back. And when he appeared, I, of course, ran over and complimented the man on the car. And he said, do you want to ride? Do you want to ride in the car? And, of course, I said, sure, that would be great. And I got in and we drove off, which was quite stupid, actually. Not that I wouldn't do it again, but it was a bit stupid. And obviously I'm safe and sound. And we drove around for about half an hour, and it was really fun and really interesting. And the guy told me about the car and where he bought it and, all the things it does. And when I got back, had a discussion with my friend about this. We were saying, wow, what if you never came back? Like, what if you didn't come back? What if the car just drove off and that was that? So that was an event that got me thinking. That was an incident that got me thinking about what would happen. And I think for, as I've said, for all the readers out there who are also writers, and I know that there are many, you often find there are these sort of things that happen to you that you sort of want to explore further in a way that asks, what if? What if? And then the second thing I think that inspired the book was that I think, like many people, I find disappearances fascinating, when someone just appears to vanish off the face of the earth. But if there's anything more fascinating than that, it is when that person suddenly appears back years and years later.
Yep, absolutely. Because that, again, I think there's a level of trauma to Maddie disappearing and Jonathan's reaction, and hearing your backstory as the spark, for sure. It gives us a lot to think about as well. But I'm curious though, Niko, who was your favourite character in the book? And again, I know the novel is told from Jonathan's point of view and it centres Maddie disappearing. So it can be either of those two, or maybe someone else that you either enjoyed writing or discovering, or maybe you connected to.
Yeah, so I'll phrase this carefully. When we talk about what happened to Maddie, and when we look at all the characters in the book, and really everyone's a suspect, right? I suppose the person who was really responsible is probably my favorite character.
Okay.
That was the most fun to write with. But I think I enjoyed writing each of the characters in sort of, because the novel for me is very character driven. I really focus very much on dialogue. I like to bring out the different ways in which people speak. One of my goals in writing any book is that once you get to know each of the characters a little bit, I'd love to think that people can just open the book at a random page and read 2 lines of dialogue and know exactly who's speaking. And I had a lot of fun in writing everyone's dialogue because everyone in the book is sort of very different. So, for instance, there's Saul, who is Jonathan's sort of brother-in-law, who's very self-satisfied. He too is successful. He's very self-satisfied and a bit sort of sanctimonious. Jonathan's friend Jay, who is just a dreadful, overgrown frat boy. He was great fun to write. And I suppose that's another element to the book, that it is a goal of mine, which is to be entertaining. Because I'm English, and you'll understand this, because I'm English, I'm really reluctant to take anything too seriously. And so even with Jonathan, he went through this dreadful thing, and we see him just sort of almost reliving it again when he thinks that he sees Maddie in the bookstore. But also Jonathan is slightly ridiculous as as a character. As I said, he's very successful. He's a bit complacent. He's awfully judgmental. He's quite neurotic. His priorities are not always the priorities that, someone should necessarily have. He's very concerned with his self-image, probably like all writers. And so writing him was also really fun. So it would be very hard for me to choose just one character. I think it's more fair of me to say I like them all equally.
Oh, yeah, that is fair. Most authors do. But I like the fact that we never shared who was the guilty person, but I like that you made mention of them as well. But I want to jump into your writing life real quick. How long did it take for you to write and pull together Birthday Girl?
Birthday Girl took me 2 years.
2 years.
Yeah.
Okay. And I see you previously wrote and published The Favourite, which was published in the UK in 2017 under SV Berlin. So I'm curious, how was it similar to or different from writing and publishing Birthday Girl?
Ooh, that's such a juicy question, Victoria. I guess it was different in 2 aspects. So the book was different in, I guess it was more sort of the dreaded L word, so literary fiction. And it was a dark family drama, which was sort of the aftermath of a death in the family. It is also, though, character driven. It's also about relationships and the tensions between different characters in different families. And it was also something where I was thinking of the phrase "take the piss," where I had great fun in writing the characters, sort of entertaining myself, if not entertaining the reader. And the process with that was that I remember sending it out to get an agent, and it got 42 rejections. And someone one day wrote to me, a friend of mine emailed me, and she said, "Oh, did you know there's this really, really good publishing house in the UK called Myriad, and they are willing to look at manuscripts without the intervention of a literary agent." And so I sent it off. And I think, at the time they only published maybe 12 books a year. And they were lovely enough to take on The Favourite. And so it was published with Myriad in 2017. When I finished Birthday Girl in 2019, I didn't have an agent still. I sent it out, and I didn't have a lot of hopes with sending it out. And almost immediately got picked up by an agent here in New York, which is brilliant. I think I'm trying to think how else it was different. I think the main thing for a writer, for a new writer, if you've never been published, is when your book does get taken on by a publisher, is the sudden and unexpected interest in your book by a whole team of people, which is absolutely brilliant, because you do sort of toil away alone. You don't really know what you're doing. I think that's another difference with the second book versus the first book, is that unfortunately, by the time you come to write your second book, you've maybe learned a few things. So you're writing it a little bit more self-consciously, which may or may not be a good thing. But it's an interesting thing.
Right, right. No, absolutely. That makes sense. I can see that. Especially the publishing side, and then also now, republishing a new book. So there are similarities and differences. I can see that. But what would you say is the most difficult part of your creative process?
It's a really good question. I love that you call it my creative process, because that sounds very grand. At the moment, I would say just finding the time to sit down and write, because I have a regular job, which is very busy. And I find, I think that as a writer, I think you should only write if it's fun. And I write in main part because it's fun to write and I really enjoy it. So I don't think you should ever be writing if you're suffering agonies and, you're sort of sitting with a bottle of whiskey at the typewriter, trying to bang out one word. There's a certain sort of romanticized view of a writer where you're sort of tortured and all the rest of it. And I actually don't believe in all that. I think if it's tortured, don't do it, do something else. But I do think that if you have a full-time job, which a lot of writers do, and then you have the other full-time job of being a writer, being an author, sometimes it's sort of deciding between, will I actually see any of my friends this week, or will I just sort of sit at my desk and write and not talk to anyone, not see anyone? And the difficult thing about that is that it's actually much more fun sitting at your desk and writing.
I think I agree with that. I always say to my husband, like, I'd much rather, either write something, read something, instead of, spending time with people. And I say, that's you included.
It is recently, yeah. I think, depends on the kind of, day job you have. My day job is, it's remote, but I talk to a lot of people, sort of have Zoom calls all the time.
Yeah.
And it's very worky. And so sometimes, at the moment, I'm trying to assign a certain amount of time to write in. Often that's a Sunday and a Saturday. I'd love to be one of those, I really, really envy writers who say, oh, yeah, I can sit in a cafe and write, or I just write on the go. So I'll just write for 10 minutes and then 20 minutes later. I need a good span of the day in which to write. I need to take a whole day or a whole morning, so that I have time to decide to clean under the sink or organize my sock drawer, that kind of thing. Which is what writers do when they should be writing.
When they should be writing. Yeah. No, I agree. You find a million other things to do. All right. So, Niko, I want to get into your reading life real quick. So I know we're here to talk about Birthday Girl, but I want to know, and I'm sure my readers, they always want to know, what are you reading? Tell us about the last book or books that you finished reading that you'd now recommend.
The book that I just finished, so I'm not a big rereader, even though I just mentioned that I want everyone to read my book twice. But I'm not a big rereader, but one book that I read probably every few years is Donna Tartt's The Secret History. And I'm just coming to the end of that for probably the fourth time. And I think that's one of my very favorite books as an adult. It's one of my very favorite books. And I really recommend it. It has a lot of the things that I really enjoy: social commentary, fraught relationships, death. Yeah, it has all the things.
It has all the things. That is true. I really love that one as well. What books are you looking forward to reading, though, in the year ahead?
So I think one of the answers that I always try and prepare if I have an interview is, one, what is your favorite book? And two, what books are you reading? And three, what books do you intend to read? Because whenever someone asks me that, my mind goes completely blank. But actually, I have next up on my list is Anne Patchett's These Precious Days, which is a series of essays that she has written, which I guess is sort of reflections on her life to the present day, and I'm really looking forward to reading that.
Yay, awesome. So in addition to loving books and authors and just everything literary, we love bookstores. So share with our listeners your favourite, either local, childhood, one you discovered on your travels. Just share with us one of your favourite indie bookstores.
So I think here in New York, Reli's Bookstore, which is in the West Village, which is lovely. It's like a little bookstore out of a movie. And it's been there for years and years and years, and, always really good for a visit. And then the other bookstore that I like is a huge bookstore down on Broadway called The Strand, which is sort of a New York institution almost, and it's massive. And you can pretty much find anything you want. And yet, as far as I know, it's the only one of its kind. So it's sort of the size of a chain, like one of the big bookstores, but actually it's still independent, and that's a great place.
Yep, absolutely. So getting back now to Birthday Girl, just kind of tying things together. I know you've done your job as the writer, you've written up the book, you've given it to us, it's up to us now to read it and kind of, form our own thoughts and opinions. And I'm here saying to readers, I loved it, I want you all to read it too. But what are you hoping for, Niko? In an ideal world, I guess you could say, what are some of the reactions you're hoping for, or just some thoughts you're hoping readers might have?
I've thought about this probably more than is healthy, but I really would like if people don't guess the ending. In other words, I'd like it if people are surprised by the ending, because that's really fun. And I would like it if people find it funny and entertaining.
Yep, absolutely. Niko, thank you so much for coming on the show and speaking with me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. It was wonderful. I really appreciate it. And thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning in to The Reader's Couch. You can find out more about the show and submit your questions for our guest by visiting our website, thereaderscouch.com. You can also connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at The Couch Is Booked. If you like the show, please subscribe, share, and take a few seconds to leave a rating and review. Next week, I'll be back with new guests, more books, and some fun games we can play. But until then, stay lounging, stay reading, and whenever you're in doubt, go straight to your local bookstore or library. Thanks for listening, and happy reading.